This is a bit shocking. We have reports that an aircraft of some kind has just now crashed into one of the World Trade Center buildings.
We were up playing cards in our room, and so we all went, wow, man, no, there's something going on here, because a second plane just hit the other tower.
An explosion in the second, no, that's a second plane.
Wow, what the hell's going on?
I know it was the States, but I still feel like it's North American soil, and I feel like that's a part of us.
Unbelievable. Oh, my God.
I was upset, and I just wanted to make it right somehow. It's go time.
The Americans are our allies, closest allies we have. Well, we need to help them out.
Hundreds of soldiers are leaving wives and children behind. They are bound for Afghanistan, Canada's first official combat mission in a half a century.
We actually loaded up our magazines with live rounds. Now you know it's something a little different. They said, well, we're flying you right into Kandahar Airfield. We'd seen it on TV, so it was all very surreal.
When we came in, we had to do evasive maneuvers with the aircraft. That kind of stuff would get your adrenaline going. You're coming in pretty fast just due to the threat of surface-to-air missiles. That phrase that I used, it's go time, it really felt like it. It felt like opening the Bible and looking at some biblical time 2,000 years ago. It was like the moon.
The door opens up, the ramps open up, and you know, all you see is essentially desolation.
You know, that first step onto the tarmac, you knew you were in a war zone. It looked like it. So it was kind of an awakening.
When we first got off the plane, the American military, they looked fit. These kids were all like California guys and tanned and 19, 20, and 21. Most of us were like late 30s and 40s. And they were just looking at us like, who are these? Why did Canada bring all these old men to fight?
The very first Coyote that rolled off the C-17 when it landed had a I Love New York bumper sticker on the front of it. And when the Americans saw that, it almost reduced them to tears. And in fact, some of them did cry. So here are these big, hardened soldiers, you know, really appreciating that kind of sentiment, that we were all, you know, brothers in arms, and we're working with them to help right wrong that had been done to them. The operation to essentially clear the Shahi Valley. The special forces had been chasing a bunch of al-Qaeda elements through the foothills of the Hindu Kush Mountains, where they were trying to escape into Pakistan, and so they were trying to cut off their escape routes into Pakistan.
We were all like fantasizing, basically, like it'd be cool that if a Canadian group caught bin Laden.
Once we got told that we were gonna go, your adrenaline starts pumping and you get excited.
After having received orders, I'm walking out there with the rest of the platoon, loaded to the gills with ammunition and water. And the Padre was giving blessings, and our faces were camouflaged. 12 Chinooks spool up their engines, and away we go. For a guy who just left Edmonton a couple months earlier, was quite a thing.
Actually, right across from me was a Delta Force sniper. He looks at me and goes, you know, who are you guys with? And I said, we're Canadians. And he kind of just looks at me and kind of gives me a nod. And he said, we're going into a hornet's nest.
And we were all looking at each other saying, what the hell's going on here?
You got to remember now, these are crazy mountains, so we're doing some amazing flying. And then all of a sudden they stop, and the ramp goes down, and the load master, the guy at the back that controls us, he says, all right, get out. The first intelligence estimate was that there were probably somewhere between 40 and 60 Al-Qaeda fighters. That gave a lot of guys pause because it would have meant very close, very personal, close combat. You know, this could be a real dodgy operation.
American B-52s continue to pound Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters from high in the sky, while ground troops try to cut off their escape routes. But these mountains on the border with Pakistan are a tough place to fight.
Our job was going up there and searching the whole area for any Taliban. We would basically search and destroy. If we found anything, we'd never Taliban, we'd shoot them and kill them. Any things that we found, like equipment-wise or caves, our mission was to actually blow the hell out of them.
We never experienced anything bigger than fleeting shots from these people. They were using a sort of quintessential guerrilla tactic. So we contacted them, but we never really saw them. So we would get shots taken at us. We'd hear that they were, you know, somewhere, so we'd go look for them, and they disappeared by then.
Colonel Stogren said, we think snipers might help. I had a good sniper section, or a good couple of snipers in that organization.
Colonel Strogan told us that we're going to be deploying in support of a special operations task against the Taliban in the Shaikat Valley.
That they put the snipers essentially to provide overwatch on on the companies down below, and essentially to act as cutoffs. You know, if the Al-Qaeda were trying to get out or get in, either on foot or in vehicles, the snipers could interdict them.
What a sniper does, they travel by themselves, and they're given an area to watch over. And they usually travel in either two-man teams. In the two-man teams is a sniper, and then the spotter.
We had our orders, and we had our map with our outline of our area of operation. There was a box which we were to operate in and not go out of. The reason for this is engagement by friendly aircraft. Because we couldn't engage these guys from the position we were in, we made the decision to move outside the box. We knew the risk that would come with that.
If the Americans were getting shot at or anything like that, the sniper would try and find the target and then eliminate the targets.
Got yours?
They made quite a few kills.
In the following days, we identified a three-man team, one of which were carrying an RPK, so it's a light machine gun. And that was identified as the target we'd engage. First round, we shoot at this guy, and no real reaction. They kind of stop, look around. Those type of ranges now, because we're past that 2,400 meter mark, not much of a reaction from them. Make an adjustment from Tim. Fired a second shot. I think he hit his bag. Don't change anything. Breathe, rack another round, send another round down range, which made its impact. Target drops. There's no celebration. It's work. We later learned that the shot that we took at 2,430 meters was indeed a world record for a kill mating in combat by a sniper.
I think you could see the elation in everybody's face coming back. And that they looked their fears or their doubts in the eye, a feeling of victory kind of thing that we managed to pull it off.
They saved a lot of American lives. The Americans were very, very happy with the Canadian snipers. That's when we got back, that's all the Americans talked about was our Canadian snipers. They made the Americans realize that the Canadian forces, the Canadian military, is an actual force to be reckoned with, and what they did up there.
The Canadian troops say that their mission was successful. Al-Qaeda was cleared from these mountains, but leaders warn there is more danger ahead.
We went to Tarnac Farms to do some more training. It was an old training ground for the Taliban, for Al-Qaeda, Taliban. You know, the videos of them doing their little jumps and twirls and shooting.
When we got there, we used it as a training facility too. We took over and used it as a rifle range and a live fire range so we could get ready to go off on some of our missions.
We were out on the range on Tarnak Farms, and we were supposed to engage some ruined Soviet tanks, targets that were off in the distance. We had a fixed position on a wadi, so it was like a very big ditch, and we were on the lip of that ditch, firing at the old Soviet tanks.
The sections were rotating through, and then it was our turn. Grenade! And it just started out normally, as it was supposed to. The firing was happening, and it was going well. No issues, really.
I was firing a Carl Gustav, sort of like a rocket launcher. It's a shoulder-fired weapon. That was the #1 on it. I remember yelling over at another guy, Private Green. I remember yelling at him, and as I was getting ready to fire my last round, there was a huge explosion off to my left.
I heard it coming in. I heard the whistling. I heard something. It was obviously a split second, but I was like, no way.
The blast went right through my body, hit him, and threw him down the wadi, and threw everyone else down the wadi.
The blast was, I can't even describe it.
And then there was nothing. I remember it being eerily calm. That quiet is something that's, you know, haunted me ever since it happened. It's a terrible experience. Just thinking you're alone and thinking you're about to die.
And I just remember looking at my hand, and obviously I was reaching down, I was touching my leg, and I just knew it was covered in blood, and that I needed help.
I tripped over someone in the dark there, and there wasn't much left, and you know, I didn't know what it was until I picked it up, obviously, and put it down. And I know what soldier who it was, but you know, there was just so much trauma.
I was asking, like going through my nominal roll in my head of my troops, if they were all okay. And I was getting a lot of positive answers. And I kind of remember not getting that response for Ricky's name, so.
And then helicopters started coming in, and we started loading. I was with Lorne, and I thought he was gone for sure, just the way he looked.
And I remember them walking down with me on the stretcher, and I don't know how I joked with them. I just said, "Don't drop me, you pricks."
I remember talking to him on the helicopter. I was holding his hand, and he was not responding to me whatsoever. He was so messed up. You know, he basically had minutes to live, I would say, you know. And just so happens the right people were in Kandahar that day that saved his life. A neurosurgeon from the United States military happened to be passing through. And because he was such a great doctor, he was able to do a lot of things that, for Lorne that day.
I'm saddened, quite frankly, beyond words to inform you that several of our troops were involved in a tragic friendly fire accident. An American F-16 fighter jet released one 500-pound bomb. 4 Canadian soldiers were killed and 8 injured. We will not forget these brave soldiers.
The investigation should soon yield answers as to how this tragic accident occurred. Friendly fire is not a new problem, and perhaps more likely when more than one nation's armed forces are on the battlefield.
If you were testifying, you could see them. You could see the American pilots. When I first saw Schmidt, there's a smug look on his face that I wanted to just rip off his face, like he was the victim. Umbach was totally different. When I looked at him, he looked remorseful. He looked like he had made a mistake. But Schmidt, when I saw him and looked him right in the eyes, I didn't see that.
From what I gather from the trial and from everything else is both these pilots were flying back from a mission.
The U.S. military today released several minutes of video and audio from the cockpit.
So they saw some flashing on the ground, so they turned their aircraft towards the flashing and flew over to investigate what it was. One of the pilots called in and said that they feel threatened.
He requested to open up on our guys with cannon fire, with his machine guns.
Request permission to lay down some 20 mic. Stand by. Let's just make sure that it's not friendly, that's all.
He got denied.
Copy 5-1, boss man, hold fire, I need details.
And they were flying around still, and then he thought that they were being fired at again and declared self-defense and rolled in, as he called, rolling in self-defense.
Okay, I've got some men on a road, and it looks like a piece of artillery firing at us. I am rolling in self-defense. Boxman copies. Check master arm, laser arm.
What he was actually looking at was the backblast of my Carl Gustav. His crosshairs were on me, on my weapon system, and that's when he just hit the button.
Bombs away, cranking left. Shack. Boss man. Copy 5-1. Boss man, disengage. Friendlies Kandahar.
It was a 500-pound bomb. Big bomb.
Coming back left.
Through their recordings, you can hear them. They're like, well, I hope we did the right thing and that they were going to be under the microscope now.
I hope that was the right thing to do. Yeah, me too.
Kandahar Airfield is lit up like a Christmas tree. How could you come to that decision to drop a bomb without checking that 4 kilometers or 1 finger's width away from the biggest coalition base in southern Afghanistan? How could you not check?
The military judge's language was severe about Major Schmidt in particular, citing willful misconduct. But the conclusion was his actions were not criminal. There will be no court-martial.
Schmidt went back to his unit. He got a severe reprimand. Supposedly wasn't allowed to fly. But from what I've heard, I don't know if he has. I don't really care.
Do you think justice was served?
I don't know what would have been just. 10 years in jail wouldn't have changed a thing. You know, life goes on, and it has to.
I never got pissed off at the Americans once, because every time we went on any mission, we ever got in trouble, it was just one radio call and said, we need help, and there'd be an American fighter bomber helping us out like this in seconds. So you can't blame the whole American forces.
There are still many questions and very few answers. But today is a day of mourning as the fallen soldiers make their final journey home.
You know, the outpouring of support from the Canadian populace was just amazing. I was, buddies with them all. Mark Leger, Richard Green, Smith, and Ainsworth Dyer. My personal problem with all that was I was extremely hard on Green. It was hard for me because the last thing he would have heard would have been me, jacking him up or yelling at him. So I felt very bad for that for many, many years.
Yeah. I was tasked with driving Rick's casket. Just kind of went back and just kind of chit-chatted with him for a few minutes.
What'd you say?
Basically wished him well. So we'll definitely see you again sometime.
Colonel Stogren got everybody together and said, all right, you may be angry, but the mission carries on. We very quickly, you know, put our emotions to the side and kept up with our mission. Yeah.
The United States, Colonel Frank Wyszynski, his attitude was, we are brothers and you are one of us. We're going to mourn together. We're going to memorialize these fine young men, and we're going to move on. And what other option is there?
Kandahar, the heartland of the Taliban. The first city the religious army conquered, and the last to fall when the US-led coalition brought their rule to an end. For decades, people here have known little but war.
Canadians asked for Kandahar, but they didn't actually, I don't think they actually realized how bad that was going to turn out to be.
I was talking to a couple of the foreign affairs guys, and I said, Kandahar, eh? That's going to be tough. And they said, really? Because we heard it's all good. It's not going to be that bad. I said, oh, yeah, I don't know who's telling you that, but that's a tough part of Afghanistan.
Now, a group of Canadian soldiers are returning to Kandahar province to rebuild and, if necessary, deal with any remaining insurgents. The first deployment of Canadians in Kandahar since 2002 will form a Provincial Reconstruction Team, or PRT, soldiers, police, and aid workers.
When we took over from the Americans, the Afghans realized it was a different group in the people running this show now. So when we lowered the American flag, everybody thought we were going to put the Canadian flag up, and we said no. We put the Afghan flag up. And they looked at us, and the Afghans were looking at us like, where's your flag?
Everything we did was anchored on our development funding. In that year, Afghanistan became the largest Canadian aid program in the world, so there was a lot of money to program.
Glyn Berry was in charge. The ones that worked with him, we called him the professor, because he was very, very intelligent, very, very smart man.
His job was to extend the will of the central government of Afghanistan and Kabul out to the province and to get that message across to the local politicians.
We're going to leave the PRT and come down through.
They said, okay, you're going to do this PRT, Provincial Reconstruction Team. And that was the first time we ever did anything like that. There were 8 people, like give aid to the towns.
I saw that mission as twofold. We were there to assist with reconstruction, but it was hostile territory. We were not wanted there by a lot of the people who live there and who know the ground, and so we were in danger every single day.
Whenever we went on patrol, it was usually 3 or 4 vehicles in a convoy. You couldn't accomplish anything inside the wire of the camp by just staying there. You had to get out and around and talk to people and show that you were there to assist and that you weren't afraid to get out and assist.
It's the beginning of a brand new mission in southern Afghanistan, and Canadian soldiers are facing new dangers. It's hard to know who is a friend or who is a potential foe.
I was Glyn Berry's driver. Driving in Kandahar, you're driving full bore. You're got a Mercedes G-Wagon. It's a great vehicle. It's fast. It's agile. There's no rules, no regulations. Just have fun. And there's sort of a Ben-Hur aspect to it, I guess.
We were always very aware of our security. Your head was on a swivel when you were in a vehicle. I mean, you were just looking constantly.
We're looking out for suicide bombers for number one, but sometimes the bad guys can use donkeys, donkey-borne IEDs. Sometimes it's a guy on a backpack. Sometimes it's a guy in a wheelbarrow. Sometimes it's a kid that wants just to throw a grenade.
One of the patrols, we just happened to stop at a, I don't even know if it was big enough to call a village. It wasn't uncommon when we first got there that people would retreat into their huts upon the arrival of a convoy, and we were fortunate enough to have a good group of interpreters with us.
I started working as an interpreter for Canadian Armed Forces when I was 15 years old. Till the end, you know, our neighbors didn't know where I was working. Being a woman in Kandahar and then working for a soldier, it's something that a prostitute will do. That's how Afghan sees it. It's a risky job.
So we'd have these shuras and all that, and we sit around.
What is a shura?
It's basically a meeting of people. We'd sit down there, and it's all on the rug, and we basically just sit there and talk. The oldest guy would talk first, and he'd say, this is what we need here. We need schools for our kids. We need this. We need protection, like that.
It's very important that the young kids see us as friendly people and not occupiers, because they're going to grow up and be the adults pretty soon. And hopefully this generation will grow up without war. And that's the most important thing. That's why we want the kids to come close to us and talk to us and shake our hands.
First school we opened up for girls. I talked to some of these girls. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I was so fascinated with their answers they gave me. They wanted to be airline pilots, not stewardess. Airline pilots. They wanted to be the president of Afghanistan. They wanted to be the governor of the province. Their goals were amazing. And I looked at that and I said, that's how the war is going to end. I said, we're not going to win this war just by fighting.
So it was really going to be, you know, we use the term a 3D mission, so defense, diplomacy, and development. But somebody forgot to tell the Taliban that.
Kandahar was the cradle of the Taliban, its birthplace, its stronghold. The soccer stadium there had borne witness to executions, stonings, amputations as a result of Sharia law, all sorts of horror.
It was a really horrible and a brutal regime and the darkest day in the whole history of Afghanistan. And the people of Afghanistan will never, ever forget that time.
By 2006, when we got over there was already indications that there was probably more Taliban activity than we had anticipated. And the feeling we were getting was, okay, that this is supposed to be getting easier, and it's not, it's getting harder.
Taking advantage of U.S. withdrawal, insecurity increased greatly, and Taliban is reacting to that. But should we not have thought about that, and especially in Kandahar, because it is the heartland of the Taliban?
I was going in as one of the first two civilian police into the Kandahar Provincial Reconstruction Team. Our job as civilian police going into PRT was to do a needs analysis of the Afghan National Police capacity in Kandahar province, and then decide what we could do to assist them.
The Afghan police was a mixed bag, from district to district, from town to town. Sometimes they weren't getting paid, sometimes they were corrupt. A lot of them demonstrated some pretty remarkable courage. A lot of them also demonstrated some horrific corruption and vices.
It came to my attention that police salaries were not being paid. It was being siphoned off. It was one of my local staff who made me aware. He said that, Nipa, you know, I hear this is happening. Maybe we should make a trip to the UN office and find out what they're doing. Unfortunately, you know, nobody paid attention.
The Afghan security forces, especially in southern Afghanistan, have a terrible track record of summarily killing and torturing Afghan civilians. And so when villagers were mistreated by Afghan security forces, in many places they blamed the foreigners, in some places the Canadians, who brought them there in the first place.
I think one of the main things that people sometimes go back to Taliban is injustice within Afghanistan. When they don't get justice by the government, that's when they go and ask the Taliban to do it for them. Taliban start coming back to the power. We thought they were defeated and they will never come back to Afghanistan, but we were wrong.
Well, we were well aware of security issues, right? I'd had security briefings, intel every day. We had security updates every day. And you knew there were issues, obviously, and that we were prone to attack at any given time.
I was told a couple of times by the guards that there are people coming and asking about you. You shouldn't be coming here. One time I was called, like, at the meeting by the Director of Women's Affairs, and she told me that, Mariam, I know you're a good girl, and we really need your help, but I also care about women here. He said, you're a child, and you don't know that you're at risk. That was the first time that my father realized that their daughter was at risk.
Canadian diplomats and aid workers have to reach out to the local populace, but the soldiers protecting them have to always be ready for attacks.
January 15th, 2006 started like every other day. You would know generally the night before, sometimes the morning of, what your mission was. My patrol group headed out to do what we call the presence patrol, which is exactly what it sounds like. We drive around the area and let our presence be known.
There was a patrol plan to Tactipol, small town, not that far away. And the mission of that was to go visit with the local government in the town. That was Glyn's primary responsibility that day.
Glyn Berry has his meeting on the way back, and we're just driving casually to our provincial reconstruction team site. And as we drive in through the city gates, we're fairly close in the vehicles. There's 4 vehicles in the convoy.
We were told that there's possible suicide bombers in Kandahar. We get that all the time in our reports. Possible suicide vehicles driving around Kandahar, white Toyota Corollas, or this type of vehicle, this type of vehicle. When you watch them, you're on pins and needles. You're like watching like every which way.
You always had your head on a swivel watching everything, and this was a difficult place to keep watching because there was so much activity.
And all of a sudden, Jeff, my co-driver, calls car right, and at that exact moment, I swerve as hard as I can left.
I remember just the feeling of this concussive wave coming at us.
And it lifts our vehicle up through the air, tumbling.
It was one of those things you couldn't believe it while you were watching it. It was corkscrewing through the air.
I pop out, my left leg's ripped off instantly, my right leg's destroyed, hands and face are on fire. My sergeant is on the radio, and he's saying, Paul's dying.
Their patrol was hit by a vehicle-borne IED.
He's a suicide bomber.
Absolutely. Mr. Glyn Berry died instantly in that IED strike.
I remember every second. The pain, oh, the pain. It was like a chainsaw.
Jake Petton and one of my other corporals said, if we don't get rid of Franklin, he's gonna die.
2 Afghans start walking out of the crowd, right straight directly towards me, eyes locked on me. My buddy Jake Petton, he brings up his rifle and he's ready to shoot them dead. And then for whatever reason, he doesn't. So he brings down his rifle, and what they were doing was helping me. So they helped lift me up.
Just threw him in the front seat. And there was 2 sets of legs around the scene there. We grabbed the 2 legs and they just threw them on top of Franklin.
Paul came in first. Oh, he was talking and conscious. The first thing he wanted to know was, is everyone else okay? Because Paul was their medic. So that would be the first thing that he would want to know, is everybody else okay?
What did you tell him?
I said, you don't need to worry about that right now, Paul. We're gonna worry about you.
And she said, I heard someone lost a leg. And apparently, in a big dramatic swoosh, I take the blanket and I go, that was me. I lost both. So, medic humor.
I would like to think whenever a medical professional is treating someone, it's always their best. But when it's someone you know, someone you've worked with, you think about their family too. You think, I have to be able to send him home. The absolute need to have him go home is overpowering.
I knew that I had to make it. It was a matter of just no ifs, ands, or buts. I was going to make it. If I'm still alive now to think this, then I'm going to stay alive right to the end, and I'm going to stay alive and see my family.
Tragedy in Kandahar. A senior Canadian Foreign Affairs official was killed in the service of his country today by a suicide bomber. 3 Canadian soldiers and several Afghans were grievously injured in the attack.
A sad ceremony as a piper plays a final farewell to Glyn Berry, the Canadian diplomat who volunteered to come to one of the most dangerous places on Earth, in the end giving his life to help Afghans rebuild their shattered country.
He paid the ultimate sacrifice.
At first,
His life.
you're almost numb because you're tied up in the events and what you have to do right then and there. And then you can start playing mind games, if you will, with yourself. Well, why did he pull out next to that vehicle, and why didn't it happen next to the vehicle I was in? The thoughts do go through your mind. Why Glyn? Why not me? Why am I still here when Glyn is not, and he was only 25 yards from me?
Did I give my legs to a future Afghan? I don't see it that way because I was protecting a diplomat. For me, my limb loss is about protection. So I was protecting a diplomat from an Islamic extremist, and I failed in my mission because he's dead.
Did you feel guilty?
Sometimes.
A day later, Canadian soldiers are going back outside the wire. They are going to continue their mission, but this time with a greater determination to ensure no insurgents get close enough to injure their comrades.
We looked at each other, me and Major Lutz, and said, you know what we're doing tomorrow? And we said we're taking patrols out tomorrow. Because if we waited a couple of days, they would have been too nervous to go out again. They carried on as normal.
Gunners, be extra vigilant in your turrets today, all right? And if it means you got to point a weapon at somebody, point a weapon at somebody, all right?
How did that alter the Provincial Reconstruction Team mission?
I think it was just greater resolve for us to do what we went there to do, to own that for Mr. Berry. I think it just strengthened our resolve to be there. We won't let this break us down.
The Canadians got a real shock with the death of Glyn Berry. But I think it was also part of a harsh education the Canadians were soon to get in just how violent Kandahar was going to be.
After that, my brother got kidnapped. That was really a bad thing. My brother was only 11 years old. Taliban were trying to get information from him. They tortured him very badly. That still, you can see, if you ever meet my brother, you would see the scars on his back or on his head. And they kept asking him who the lady is, what she's doing, and where her address is. But my brother never, ever told them that she was my sister. And then they released him after 3 days and stuff. And my brother was totally in a terrible situation when we got him. My family left Kandahar within 24 hours, and they moved. My father stayed with me in Kandahar because if we don't work there, how are we going to change Afghanistan?
When we landed in Kandahar, it was quite the eye-opener. As soon as you land, there's fighter aircraft taking off, there's helicopters going. So you realize, my God, this is something much bigger. So the enormity of the mission really kind of hit home and what Canada was actually involved with.
We are now entering Kandahar City. Check it out.
We were driving through Kandahar City, and all I can think of is, I grew up with Star Wars. So Star Wars and Jabba the Hutt, and here we are. I'm in Star Wars. In the back of our minds was suicide bombers in cars. There was now a resurgent Taliban, at least in the shadows.
A lot of those villages and tribes in those areas had already become so disenfranchised with their own local government that they had returned to the Taliban. The corruption fueled the insurgency. We arrived at a time that the recruitment was well underway.
First time we came under contact, it wasn't from a suicide bomber at all. We were driving back, and I was in my boss's vehicle, and someone fires an RPG at us. The RPG goes through one of our soft-skin G-Wagon vehicles and goes straight underneath the back seats. The guys that were sitting in the back seat have the RPG go underneath them, go straight through. Their pants are on fire, but not badly. So they've just, clearly had a close call. That's when you realize we're an army of strangers in a land of strangers.
869.
I was a little concerned about the Provincial Reconstruction Team going into Kandahar. One of the first things that the Taliban did in Kandahar was start killing off Red Cross workers. And that happened very early on. That happened in 2003, 2004. So the idea behind the PRT was that it would provide a little bit of protection. We knew that Kandahar was
I wouldn't call it Wild West, but maybe Wild South. And the concern was that the PRT would simply be a goat on a rope.
Officers would work with a platoon of soldiers and accompany them in their fighting vehicles to engage in discussions with village leaders throughout a whole district, one village at a time. And in those discussions, ascertain village requirements and whether or not the governance structure of the district and the province was caring about the problems of the village and doing something about it.
My job was to liaise with village elders and find out what they needed for food, water, shelter, and education. Those were my bugaboos, education. I would ask the elders if their girls could be educated. When they stopped laughing, they said, if I built them in a separate school, they could.
Why were they laughing?
Because the concept of educating girls was like educating dogs to them.
Captain Green was with Captain Shamoon in a platoon from A Company, engaged in a shura with local leaders or elders in Shinkei village.
We walked in, we lay our weapons down and our helmets. It started out well. It was our third of the day. And the previous two had gone well. We were feeling good about it. And for this shura, Rob Dolson had asked to come. He was on my left.
Why do you take your helmets off?
A sign of respect.
When you're engaged in shura, you can take your helmet off, you can take your personal protective equipment off, because Pashtunwali culture demands that the host in that village guarantees your protection while you're engaged in that kind of activity. In the middle of this shura, an Afghan youth branding an axe came up behind Captain Green.
Walked up behind me, took an axe from under his robe, and sank it in the head like he was chopping a log. The axe penetrated 3 inches into my skull. My brains are leaking out. When the man on my left, Rob Dolson, managed to grab his weapon and shoot 2 rounds into the kid before he could strike again, he saved my life. Rob Dolson, my hero. And it was a signal for a Taliban ambush from across the river. And all hell broke out.
There was a firefight immediately afterwards. There were some Taliban hidden in the village. So in fact, Shinkei had been harboring a Taliban cell while they were in discussion with us. Whether or not the youth was coerced by the Talibs, we don't know.
Pashtunwali, the code of hospitality, had been extended to them. This is now an issue between the Afghans and the Taliban, and how the Taliban don't respect their own culture. Because this was not a breach of protocol between the Afghans and us. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got everything to do with the Afghans and how the Taliban don't respect their own culture.
After he had been wounded, a lot of agencies reassessed whether or not they were going to continue with developmental efforts. So it was a natural thing for us to move into more lethal combat operations by April of 2006.
The Taliban brought a guy named Mullah Dadullah Lang back into the fold. And Dadullah Lang was a Taliban commander who'd actually been fired by Mullah Omar for being too brutal. Dadullah Lang came back to Omar and said, listen, we've discovered a seam here. Okay, the Americans are going to pull out of Kandahar. They're going to hand it over to the Canadians. There's a potential weakness here because the Canadians won't fight. So he convinced Mullah Omar that 2006 was the year that he could take back Kandahar City.
I had information that they had built a defensible base, a very large one in that area with compounds, defensive positions, and their sole job was to use that as a staging area to be able to launch attacks into Kandahar City. That was the purpose of it.
They planned to actually go from those bases to do a spectacular attack in Kandahar City that would get world press and demoralize NATO and make us lack credibility.
There were at least 1,500 fighters in that area, and they were ready to launch an attack into Kandahar City. I had enough information to say the force that Colonel Hope was launching was a lot smaller for the fight that we were going into. I didn't want the operation to go through, but the decision was made to launch on it.
So when Colonel Hope rolled the 1st Battalion Task Force Orion into Pashmul on the 3rd of August, they basically hit a hornet's nest.
We mustered a company from 2 PPCLI with a task to clear the area of Highway 1.
I told Ian Hope, Ian, I need you to take the town. Where is it? I said, you just go south, and when they start shooting at you, you've reached it.
Highway 1 is the main artery that ran from the west of Kandahar City toward Helmand. Very, very important road.
We would move towards what was referred to as a white school.
Was it a school?
From what I understand, the school did exist at one point. The Taliban went in, beheaded some of the teachers. A school in name only.
The fact that we call it to this day a white school perplexes me. It was a Taliban fort. It had been built as a white school. You know, it was a big brick building that was very sturdy, and so they took it over and turned it into a fortress. On the morning of August the 3rd, the battle group launched, and really they knew that the center of Taliban resistance was going to be the white school, the Taliban fortress.
And I remember Colonel Hope saying, we're going to an extremely volatile part of the country, and we are going to see combat. And hand in hand with that, you know, he was very matter-of-fact about the fact that not everyone was going to come home.
I led the southern group out at about 3 in the morning. At about 4:15, we found a group of Taliban fighters in what could only be an early warning position.
We're going to send an EMP forward to cover us as we move our way through to the blocking position.
The lead Lav 3 got on the radio and called in a contact and said, you know, I see 6 guys with rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns, and I'm asking permission to fire.
And I said yes.
So it's going to be over in that direction.
So we basically fired upon that group with concentrated Lav fire of 4 different vehicles using 25mm machine guns. There's not much left of that group once that kind of munition hits them. And then we were moving forward to actually get onto that position and find out what it was when one of our vehicles hit an IED.
There was a loud boom, and it struck the lead Lav, which was driven by Corporal Chris Reed, and he was killed.
The number of IEDs on the road prevented us from wanting to risk any more Lavs moving forward.
Colonel Hope is like, okay, we really need to get there, but I'm not willing to drive down this road anymore. So we're going to do this assault on foot.
So Sergeant Ayer and I got together, and we basically figured what the best approach was up to the school. The Lavs that were already in position, it wasn't wise to move them forward. We didn't know how many IEDs were in the road.
They had about 20-25 Afghan National Police attached to John Hamilton's platoon. And as they moved forward, they sustained heavy fire from all around the White School. The Afghan National Police immediately fled the battlefield.
I called back to Colonel Hope. I said, sir, the Afghan National Police ran away. They're hiding now in a ditch. And he goes, John, you have to show them how it's done. And I said, no problem, sir.
He courageously moved his forward troops into the school area, into the couple of outbuildings near the school, and said he was set there, which meant I would have to find more forces to come forward to begin the clearance. As I was beginning to plan that, it became obvious to us that he was actually in a kill zone, that the enemy had wanted this to happen.
And that's when the firing really started to pick up. Several RPGs, heavy small arms fire going over our heads. It's about maybe 11 o'clock, getting close to noon. Sun is at its peak, and it's 45, 50 degrees Celsius. It's extremely hot. I have guys going down the heat stroke.
You have to compartmentalize as a commander on a battlefield. You know these soldiers, you love these soldiers, and there's no other word appropriate for that. You love them. If they trust you, you feel that back. Committing them to what is almost certain injury and death is very, very difficult. At this point in the operation, though, I got over that.
So I had stayed back with those guys to provide a foot on the ground for John and the rest of the Assault Forces movement up to the school, and they were doing it in bounds.
By the time I got up to the school, to the objective area,
Back up.
I had 14 men. The vast majority of them were combat ineffective due to heat stroke, and also Private Kevin Dallaire was wounded at that time. Our situation was very precarious. They needed reinforcements up here as quick as possible. The fire was pretty intense. It was coming from all over the place. There's 14 Canadians against what turned out to be 150 to 200 Taliban. So I'd asked for indirect fire support from artillery. And it was denied.
Why?
By higher headquarters because of potential collateral damage, because this was called a school.
NATO's command and control philosophy out of Kabul was tight control of all combat forces. So, orders came down about tight regulations with the use of fire, indirect fire, direct fire, aircraft. So when we say school, there has to be a board convened, a targeting board with lawyers and experts in different types of fire and munitions, and somebody who knows about that actual facility, and they decide whether or not we can fire at that building.
That was why we had no fast air and we had no artillery. And on a conventional battlefield where we have all these enablers that are supposed to be at our disposal, to be denied them in a situation like that was, it was absolutely heartbreaking.
What was your feeling about that?
Yeah, I can repeat the words I used, but I was pretty upset.
One thing that will forever stick out in my mind is the radio chatter when those guys came under contact in the south. You could tell they were fighting literally for their lives. And to hear some of the voices on that radio, I'll never forget.
John Hamilton is yelling, "You have to come help us, you have to come help us, we've got casualties." So I looked at the two guys that were with me, Bryce and Mark, and I said, "Okay guys, we have to go link up with those guys." Now at this point, the volume of fire is picking up, and so there's machine gun fire and small arms fire. There's rockets coming down the road. So we got up and we started running across this field, and it was absolutely insane. It was one of those things that I think when you watch a movie and you see bullets splashing around people's feet and rocks skimming by your head and stuff like that, that's exactly what it was like. And at the time, I wasn't really thinking a whole lot about it, but I remember thinking like, geez, I really hope we make it.
We were still under intense fire. Guys were fighting hard. All of a sudden, things just went black, and I felt this explosion hit.
Boom, this giant explosion, and I'm being propelled backwards across this room, and I hit the wall.
After the round hit and I opened my eyes, Von Ingram was right across from me. Von was actually, as he was dying, was providing first aid to others that were wounded as well. It just speaks to the type of man that he was.
It really became obvious that there's a lot of bad guys out there and they really want us dead. Now there's 3 dead. Kevin Dallaire is seriously wounded, like gravely injured. 6 others that are pretty beat up. So there's like 4 of us that are not injured, that are still able to fight.
Went and grabbed the radio and got one transmission back, was get those f***ing labs up here, we're gonna die. And then the radio went dead.
I put out a all arms call for fire. Basically, it's a plea from a ground commander saying, we're in trouble. If there's any aircraft out there that can help. I wasn't authorized to drop a bomb, but I was authorized for a show of force. So what the US Air Force did was send a B-1 bomber at 500 feet. Now, if you've ever been under a B-1 bomber flying at 500 feet, it's probably the equivalent of an earthquake. The entire ground shakes. It was only the Air Force coming at that critical moment that saved us and turned the tide.
Labs were firing like crazy as they were driving up. And by the time they got to the school, so that by the time they crossed that 150 meters, all their guns were dry. They'd fired every single bullet.
Remember yelling over to Willie McDonald. I said, Willie, I said, get the f over here and help me out because I'm hurting. So eventually they came up, loaded us in the labs. And I remember looking over at a truck full of A&P, the Afghan National Police. They were all kind of sitting in the bed of the truck there, and they were laughing. That enraged me to the point that if I had my rifle in reach, it probably would have ended extremely ugly for them. And at that point, I had no doubt in my mind they had something to do with it.
The hardest decision I ever made was at the end of August 3rd, walking away from that fight. I don't regret the decision.
Is it tough to talk about?
I've talked about it 1,000 times, and, you know, from a personal therapy perspective there, it's what's helped me the most deal with that, is talking about it and letting people know the type of heroes that fought that day. Guys like Sergeant Von Ingram, Corporal Bryce Keller, Private Kevin Dallaire, Corporal Chris Reed, guys like that. I have to talk about it because I'd be doing them an injustice if I didn't.
I was just as upset as everybody else because, knowing something that might happen, then it comes true, it weighs on you, and it weighed on me for many years. Even though we took significant casualties at the White School, and it was a tough day for everybody, that allowed us to confirm the information that led to Operation Medusa, so that eventually led to the saving of Kandahar City.
Fighting a counterinsurgency of the nature that the Taliban presented was as combat-oriented as anything we've seen since Korea or World War II. The ground that they picked was the same ground that the Mujahideen had fought on when they defeated a Russian division 30 years earlier. It's the same ground that they beat the British on in the 1800s. This is the same piece of dirt they've been fighting over for hundreds of years.
The White School was a Taliban stronghold that was being used as their base of operation.
The White School was in one of the biggest kill zones that the Taliban had created, a very large, over a kilometer long.
Operation Medusa was actually the second operation to take the White School.
The White School was the same objective that the 1 PPCLI battle group had trouble dealing with about a month earlier before Medusa.
So it wasn't really a school?
No, it's not a school at all.
I had a field troop in the north attached to Bravo Company, and they were staging out of Patrol Base Wilson. The idea was to sandwich the insurgents in Panjwaii by approaching from the north and from the south across the river.
With an attack launching from the south, there was a chance that the enemy would begin to withdraw north, where we'd be waiting. Hammer and anvil kind of strategy.
With 3 companies worth of labs, we were the most powerful fighting force since the Soviets were there. The Americans had nothing like that. In the end, we were it. We were the only show in town that could do the job.
This was going to be the biggest battle NATO has ever had, before or since.
The orders were they're going to do 3 days of aerial bombings. So they were going to soften the defenses up of the Taliban. We had actually dropped leaflets saying, you are to leave this area. And they had marked off, if you're found in this rectangle, you will be seen as a combatant and you will be, taken out.
We started seeing people sort of surging out. We were checking people, searching people to make sure that they weren't armed or, Taliban trying to flee the area.
Picture like a classic movie where all the civilians are fleeing, and yet all the soldiers are going in the opposite direction.
Once they started with the airstrikes, we're sort of hanging out on the sidelines, so to speak, waiting for the order to move. Anxiety was starting to kick in.
The initial plan called for 48 to 72 hours of bombardment to soften up the target. The decision was made to abridge that by General Fraser, I believe.
To use air power alone and just bomb everything off the face of the earth would not have defeated the enemy. They would have moved out of the way, or they would have hunkered down in holes, because you can't destroy everybody who's hiding. Doing that also disenfranchises everybody who owned a house there. We were not there to destroy the homes of people.
Combat is basically everything we had trained for up to this point. So yeah, I'd say we were kind of raring to go. We really had no clue what was coming.
Charles' company then was to advance across the river and get up onto the White School and seize it. Ideally, it would have been unopposed, but what they drove into, Charles' company drove into, was a very determined enemy.
When we first pushed off, it was pretty quiet. We hadn't seen combat up to that point, so we didn't really know what to expect or what we were looking for, really.
We dismounted from the labs, and then we went forward. It was disheartening, Like, you're looking around like, why are we walking in a line, straight line, World War I style. I remember looking up and seeing this green pen flare, and I thought, man, that's weird. Why is there a pen flare just going up in the air? The Taliban had sent this up, and that was the signal letting everyone know that we had gone far enough into the trap. Charles' company literally marched into the guns. Then they open up.
They essentially lured us into that kill zone.
All hell broke loose. A rocket took out a sergeant. And another rocket took out a lav with Rick Nolan in it. Both were killed instantly.
That was the first time that I came under fire.
It was a withering amount of fire that Charles' company was being confronted with.
I can hear the rockets and the bullets flying. There's about 400 Taliban that are dug in, and we're 2 platoons, about 80 soldiers.
I remember hearing it on the radio. They were getting hit hard. And even though you can't see it, you know that things weren't going right for them right off the bat. And there was a genuine worry, and you start to get that feeling in the pit of your stomach.
No time did I ever feel like anybody had overall control. People didn't know whether they were coming or going. It was chaos. Frank Mellish actually took over this section. He was meant to be a soldier. Like, he was born with a rifle and standing at attention. It was at that point that this black football-esque metal object screamed right by me. It was a rocket. And it was at that time that I realized Frank was no longer standing there. Frank had been killed by this rocket, along with Private William Cushley.
Let's go, move back. Hey, let's go, we're moving back.
We had our asses handed to us. We lost.
I'm all right.
It was devastating. We were rock stars till that point. We were indestructible to that point. You know, nothing had really happened to us. And that just, it brought everything crashing down.
There's a weight of responsibility that goes on a commander's shoulders that I don't think, unless you've ever been a commander, you understand and appreciate how lonely it is and how much of a burden that is. Everyone thinks about killing the other person, but you actually are going to kill your own people, and you can't avoid that. If you thought that fight that you've just gone through was bad, tomorrow is going to be absolutely worse. The Taliban that day got lucky. Charles' company had done a great job getting onto the objective, but the Taliban got lucky and killed 2 NCOs and 2 soldiers. And as a result of that, we had to recock and attack again onto the same ground.
The next morning, we had our orders. We were going to cross again, and we were going to do the show of force again.
One of the opening salvos was going to be a strafing and bombing of White School by A-10s on the morning of the 4th. And that's exactly what transpired, or where things started to go wrong again, as we now know.
The way the sun rises in Afghanistan is such a weird way. There's this hazy, dingy light that comes up. The sun was trying to cut through this smog, this pollution, this filth.
I remember seeing the A-10 circling around us, and I remember looking up at it, and I was like, oh, it's a good feeling to have that there, It's a formidable aircraft. It's deadly, absolutely deadly.
I watched the A-10 roll in. We all let out our cheer, because the A-10, when it does roll in and let loose its cannon, makes an incredible, kind of a chainsaw ripping noise.
It's such a haunting sound. I don't even know how to explain it. It's loud, and it sounds like almost like a moose call, but it echoes. Just echoes off the mountains. It's so loud.
And the next thing I know, I'm tossed in the air. I remember I land face first and skidding across the jagged rocks and this dust.
I remember marveling at the aircraft, and I was like, I turned to the guys over the side, and I was like, looks like somebody's getting breakfast, or it looks like somebody's eating it, or something to that effect.
It was then that the blood began to pour down my face, and I'm trying to catch it with my hands. I'll try to save it, I guess. And as I'm trying to save this blood, it begins to overflow. There's so much blood pouring into my hands that I have like a handful, like when you wash your face and you let it fill up. I sit before you as a man that knows what it's like to feel the wind on his exposed brains. What turned out to have been an American A-10 Warthog had accidentally strafed us.
And the pilot was looking at Charles' company's garbage pit where they had eaten breakfast and were burning their garbage before mounting their vehicles to fire me in. And so when the pilot had rolled in, instead of rolling in on the school, he rolled in on Charles Company with a couple of bursts of his cannon.
The radio cracked, and there was pure panic on the other end of that radio. I remember them saying friendly fire, and my stomach just sort of sunk right there. I felt sick. I remember throwing up over the side of the vehicle.
And how bad is it? 1 killed, 34 wounded. And it was just like, I remember I repeated the number and I said, what?
And so essentially the Battle of Panjwaii was over for me. And in the 48 hours, 8 platoon had gone from 40 to 5 from either killed or wounded.
That's something I'll never forget. It's not the way soldiers are supposed to go, you know? Not friendly fire.
Where are we going to go with this next? We've now made 2 attempts on this and stalled. We had to regain our momentum. We needed to do something. We had to take the fight to the enemy, and what were we going to do? It had to be done rapidly, because now we're on the world stage, and the Taliban are watching.
We are the only people here on the ground, right? We need to sit here and figure out how we're going to take this objective, because there's no one going to come down here and help us. It is us, what we got on the ground.
It was decided that clearly if the Taliban now have amassed and concentrated their force south to confront Charles Company, they must have left the back door open near me. I would attack from the north.
Our OC, Major Abthorpe, came out and told us, you know, we're probably going to be thrust in as the tip of the spear, so be ready for that. You know, basically his way of telling us, game time, pull your shorts up and let's go.
This is it. It's going to be a hard fight. We will succeed in this effort and defeat an enemy in a very small piece of ground, but a very important piece of ground here. We recock yet again. We're not going to show the Taliban for a third time where we're coming from. We're going to slowly move down from the north and come down and build our own road to nullify the IED threat with all the roads that are there. So we take 2 bulldozers and we create our own path.
The Canadian bulldozers that I had in my inventory, our heavy equipment is, it's old.
Major Gasparotto wasn't happy with the state of the armor and the equipment. Tapping into the ingenuity of the sappers, they found their own armor. They welded it onto the civilian equipment. We did our very best to make these bulldozers and the rest of the heavy equipment as safe as possible.
The soldiers called it Mad Maxing from the movie.
I formed the company up on the night of the 10th to give them the pep talk, to give them the speech that a commander ought to give them, that we're going to go into battle, to prepare yourselves and so forth. But I wanted everybody to remember the significance of September 11th, 2006, that would be the day that we finally really took the fight deep into the Taliban heartland at that point of where we were going.
Very soon after, we began to launch our offensive from Patrol Base Wilson south towards the White School.
Scared, excited?
Excited and scared. Anybody that says they weren't scared was probably a liar.
We moved in a highly methodical manner whereby artillery and aerial bombardment would hit the enemy positions on the front line. Infantry dismounted would then sweep out to take that new line, which would then allow my dozers to move forward and create a breach or a lane in the grape fields or over the wadis, which then would allow the lavs to come forward.
I remember thinking a lot of things during the firefight. You know, is this real?
Go, go, go!
It was exciting. It was exciting. When I say it's fun, I can think of a lot more fun things to do than being shot at, or even having to shoot at another human being. You know, I wouldn't call that fun.
They were prepared to die for their cause.
These roads, the intelligence told us, were full of IEDs, and we found hundreds of them. The enemy places roadside bombs and IEDs along roads. So the best way to not fall victim to an IED is to avoid roads. It involved collateral damage, but it also resulted in avoiding IEDs.
I remember telling the task force, destroy as little as you possibly can, because people have to move back there afterwards. You know, knock down walls, which we can rebuild, but try not knock down the whole compound, which we don't have to do. So when the families come back, we don't become the enemy.
I remember one bulldozer. I remember watching the guy bulldozing with the optics on the vehicle, and he hit an explosive device. And you know, whether it was an old landmine or it was something that they had planted, but he hit an explosive device in front of his vehicle. I remember seeing the huge plume of dust. There was so much chaos going on, they couldn't figure out who it was, and that's when we heard Josh's name over the radio.
What's his full name?
Joshua James Kluge. Really, in the end, it took a friend dying to make me realize that this was a horrible, horrible thing.
You mean the war?
Just war. War is a terrible, terrible thing.
By the time we had made it down to the White School, the enemy had largely withdrawn. And they realized that they couldn't fight our overwhelming firepower.
We finally owned the White School. After weeks of blood, sweat, and tears, we'd finally taken that piece of terrain, which became very much a symbol to the Taliban, and they're holding out. We finally had dislocated them.
Operation Medusa, certainly the shooting portion of it had come to an end.
Success.
The mission was achieved in the end, yes.
Following our successes on Medusa and their losses, the Taliban truly realized the absolute overwhelming amount of firepower we were bringing to bear. And even in any dedicated man's mind, there comes a point of futility of why am I going to stand here? I can run away and fight another day.
Our assessment is we've probably killed 1,000, which is just disgusting a number. So we probably killed most of their command and control in the area. It was just horrendous.
In terms of numbers, nobody can really afford to lose that many people and to lose that much real estate. So I would say that it pretty much, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for the Taliban.
And so, in classic insurgency fashion, they further blended and they withdrew.
Medusa, it was a pretty big turning point in the Kandahar province. I think it was a huge victory in terms of taking away real estate from the Taliban. We did that. We took away part of their control, loosened their grip. We basically, we kicked them out of their home, took them out of their birthplace. We took it away from them.
I sincerely believe that Medusa was the battle that saved Kandahar and protected the legitimate government of Afghanistan. Without it, I believe that the insurgency would have spread like a cancer through the suburbs of Kandahar city and completely toppled that local governor. And then the rest of the country would have followed. So Operation Medusa showed the resolve of both the coalition and the government of Afghanistan to stop the insurgency from spreading.
After the Operation Medusa, they changed their tactics from coming into a direct fight with us to the traditional guerrilla warfare. But what ended up happening was we didn't look at the root cause that caused this whole issue, so population went back to supporting the Taliban, and the Taliban came with even greater resurgence because said, see, here you thought they were really going to help you, they didn't again, did they?
We were doing, I think, a lot of the right things. We were not going to win that conflict in the year that we were there. All we could do is just move the yardsticks a couple inches down range, and hand it off to the next guys, because this was a conflict that was going to be measured in a generation or two. We wear the watch, but they have the time.
As we went into the post-op Medusa phase of our deployment, we went back to Fort Martello to do true counterinsurgency. It was very much like Fort Apache. That was an analogy we used quite often. Absolutely. It was a fairly large footprint, an embattlement on top of a mountain, about 100 kilometers north of Kandahar city. If the Taliban were going to slink back to their IED ways and terrorizing the locals, then we had to get the locals to be very pro-Afghan government. And that's where having a CIMIC team like Sergeant Bascon to come up and to work with the locals and try to win the hearts and minds over.
I'm part of the PRT, the Provincial Reconstruction team, and I've been sent out here to go to the local villages and pretty much see what they need and what they're lacking out in this area. A lot of people didn't know what civil-military cooperation was. You know, they just figured, what do you know? What are you here for? Well, I'm here to make your job a little bit easier. We're not just here to kick in doors. We want to gain their trust so that we can work together and build Afghanistan back up to what it was.
It's easy to hide behind our walls and not trust anybody out there. But we made sure every day we were out in the communities. The pervasive attitude is that don't trust any of the locals now at this point. We don't know who's Taliban, who's not. You know, one minute they're farming in their field, and the next minute they're reaching under the grape field and grabbing an AK-47 and taking pot shots. And that's why sending the troops out on those patrols with Sergeant Bascon was absolutely critical.
I was aware of the dangers that could possibly happen. It's a reality that I come to terms with, that I know where I am, I know what my job is. It's dangerous, but at the same time, let's deal with the situation. Security is definitely a really, really big concern. From what we're hearing, there are quite a few Taliban in the area. When there's no coalition presence, these people are definitely in fear for their lives and for the villages that they live in.
You're there to win the hearts and minds. Part of you is trying to help these people and to win them over, but another part of you to get to the point where to take another man's life or another woman's life it required you to, you know, fill your heart with hate.
They grew up around weapons their whole life, and, you know, gunshots going off doesn't really scare them, you know, doesn't shock them or anything unless it's directed at them.
That was a very dangerous highway. One time, there was an IED strike on our convoy. Nobody was seriously hurt. My driver received shrapnel from it. One of the vehicles had the tires blown off.
What goes through your head when that happens?
It was almost a car engine block went through my head that day.
My first contact, it was definitely a very friendly contact. The village elder was very welcoming. My duties was to see how I could help them and to hear what they needed.
They're looking for security for the most part, but the biggest one I've encountered in the villages I've been to has been a well or some sort of water distribution system. Talking to the local elders, there's been a drought ongoing for 5 to 7 years. It shows.
Finding that the people are lacking a lot of water, finding that the people are getting sick from the water as well. So we're looking at their generators and water pumps right now and seeing what we can do to repair them.
It seems like a big task.
It is a big task. It is definitely a big task. Most of the villagers' concerns were their water pumps. They kept breaking down because the only way they could get water was through the ground. And we saw several of their water pumps, and we figured, let's see if we can provide spark plugs because that was their biggest issue. We took in about, I don't know, 10 to 13 water pumps to see if we could fix them.
When you start asking for physical resources that are always in short supply anyhow, is it up to the military chain of command to provide? That was not well articulated to us.
Okay, keep your eyes open, stay aggressive, push right through, keep the security bubble, no one comes in.
Being boots on the ground and trying to gain the trust of the people has always been a challenge because, you know, it's like 1 minute they're friendly to your face and then the next minute, you know, they're running away and they're obviously telling people that, you know, don't deal with the Canadians. They're not bringing good aid here. They're bringing bad medicine. And moving around the whole country and talking to different people, it just makes it so difficult to do our job as civil military cooperators out there.
Oh, I think it's not good. Your weapon.
Oh, tell her it's only for protection. We're just here to spread the word about medical aid and women and the children, especially if they're not feeling well, especially if there's a newborn baby too. Okay?
نو البته وای سیده دا خبره سیده نو دا سلاګانې چې په حساب دي زمونږ د حفاظت د خطر دي و مونږ دلته د خطر راغلو چې تاسو خبر کو د خپل د کومک چې په
Let her know that we're Canadians, we're the good people.
نو البته وای مونږ کاناډیان استو وای مونږ ښه خلک استو پوه
I patrolled down, of course, to introduce myself to the elder. He claimed to be 104 years old. And like he said, he waited out the British and he waited out the corrupt government and then he waited out the Russians. And his opinion was he's going to wait out the Taliban and he's going to wait out the coalition forces and his village will still be on the side of that mountain.
Can you let him know that we're still working on his generators and we plan to have them back within 2 to 3 days because we're still trying to find parts. Again, I'm going as fast as I possibly can and trying to get them the help that they need. There's definitely dangers along the way. Anything could happen. We're not only there to do a combat mission, but we're there to help rebuild. Most of the villagers' concerns were their water pumps. They kept breaking down. We figured, let's see if we can provide spark plugs because that was their biggest issue.
We've got a patrol going out. PRT will be going with that. And gotta find some spark plugs. Gotta, at least somebody must know something about where to get parts. All right, we now have authority to spend money. So that patrol goes out tomorrow.
To get the spark plugs, I believe we drove out in 3 vehicles. Yeah, I thought, you know, it's a market. They sell all sorts of stuff in different markets in Afghanistan, so why not give the market a try to see what they have, you know? There's definitely dangers along the way. Anything could happen. We caused a vehicle accident. We do the warning shots to, you know, keep vehicles back. And one of the bullets happened to actually go in the hood of the truck, and the truck flipped with the driver and some people in it. I had to deal with 2 women that were potentially injured, and they were wearing burqas. And my interpreter, he wouldn't look at the women. Just because women were there, he wasn't going to do his job. We get there, and No, there's no spark plugs. They're selling fruit, bread, everything but spark plugs.
Isn't there some sort of supply chain that the PRT can use to do that? As soon as we're stopped, we're pretty vulnerable. That's the problem.
All right, Mustafa.
There's no place here that we can buy them. We need to find out if there's a specific spot in Kandahar city that we can go purchase this stuff from. Didn't want to push any more forward than we were for the spark plugs just because of any imminent danger that was around us.
Not going to Kandahar?
I knew that.
Those dam pumps, they haunted us.
Knowing how far Kandahar was to get these spark plugs, it definitely wasn't worth the drive. The U.S. Special Forces were suspicious of one of the guys that lived in that outback. It's not the first time I've seen an insurgent getting captured. That was a surprise to me that they had taken the guy. I had no indication what the Special Forces were doing. They were out there doing their own thing. I was out there doing my thing. The convoy was coming up from Kandahar city to drop off supplies. That was material aid that I could give to the people because winter was coming for them. So I had blankets and warm clothing that I could give to them so that, you know, show them a sign of good faith. And it's routine for whenever a convoy comes into a forward operating base that it gets cleared.
The dog picked up the stuff.
The sniffer dog thought that there was an IED.
That's the driver of the Blue Sea camp. They decided they didn't want any of the trucks to come in, even though they only hit off the one. So.
Just a big piss off, you know, being told over the past couple days that this stuff is coming up and, you know, you want to spread good word to the people of the village and not going to have enough time to sort out the stuff and it's just going to be one big friggin' mess. So I think we managed to fix 2 out of the 13 water pumps, which was not a huge success. I'm really, really disappointed. You know, what can you do? We tried and, you know, we fell short. I was a little disappointed, but at the same time, it's like, look at where we're at. There's no Canadian Tire around the corner. I found it extremely frustrating, but at the same time, I had to make sure that I had something else to offer them. Okay, can you let them know that on Sunday at 11 o'clock that we're going to have medical doctors.
Sunday, right?
Sunday,
11 o'clock?
Yeah, they can. Some medical doctors are coming up to look at all the villagers of Elback, so anyone that's sick or needs to be looked at. Also dentist for the teeth as well. Sunday.
Can you help me with that guy to release him from Special Forces?
The village elder from Elback specifically wanted to speak to me because the U.S. Special Forces had taken the guy to question him. I had to tell him that I have no idea where they took him. I don't know why they took him. And obviously, if I did question the Special Forces, they'd tell me, like, you know, operational security can't tell you anything. Like, we can find out how he's doing and, like, where they've taken him. But upon releasing him, that's out of our jurisdiction because the U.S. guys came in, Special Forces, so we have nothing to do with that when they came out here.
No, البته وی فقط موږ دومره کولای شو چې دغه په اړه کې معلومات ترلاسه کړو لکه چې هغه چیرته دی څه دی یا جوړ دی.
Our job is reconstruction. That's what I'm here for.
And we're fixing the water pumps. How is that helping them?
I understand your side of the fence, where you're dealing with the Taliban and trying to understand what the locals are doing, and you don't trust anybody. But just to come in here blatantly and just say, like, everybody's Taliban, everyone should die, and all this, it's just completely wrong. Like, you have to have some education about coming into this place and knowing what you're getting into. Selling myself to my own people has always been a challenge. You know, sitting there saying that not everyone's Taliban. You have to go out there, you have to interact, you have to attempt to gain the trust of the people We're here to help rebuild Afghanistan. We're not here to destroy it and make the people hate us. That's not our job. That's not our role.
What she's talking about is how the Americans are, which are very much shoot first, ask questions later. That's the Canadians who, as you say, exercise restraint and judgment, right?
We pay cash for work programs. We do quick impact projects for them. So we're helping their local economy by, like, we're providing for them, you know, help them help themselves type of thing. You know, that's how we're helping them, and that's what I see.
How does that help them? Like Taliban take Jenga truck drivers out of their truck and butcher them in front of this fog. I think that's pretty sad. Cutting off heads of the villagers when we pull out of here. I'm pretty sure some of those dudes are going to lose their heads.
I don't doubt it at all. That's why there'll be a mass exodus.
Is that not sad?
The Taliban is apparently moving into the area and winning hearts and minds of the people. The locals have started supplying the Taliban with supplies, and the Taliban are also stopping people in the area from going to school. At 12:07 yesterday, a weapons cache was discovered by Echo 23 Alpha. In the past several nights, lights were observed in the vicinity of Fob Martello. Well, Martello might come under attack. Again, shocking. PRT is at risk as much as anybody else by the simple fact that they're trying to assist the local population and break the hold of the Taliban. This is a big target. There's many people. It's a highly visible event. If we're lucky, nothing happens. Everything carries on. If we're unlucky, then we have to deal with a whole lot of trouble.
The things that we could impact and did well was the medical outreach. Quite a few came to the medical outreach program that day.
We bring in doctors from the local area, and we provide free medical aid to people on the ground.
We're gonna search women. I guess they can open it up a bit, flatten it to their chest, at least we know they don't have a big bob on them, and then bring them in there and you can search in there, okay?
It's gonna look good, ticking the box for, you know, PRTs doing their job for the good village of Elback, you know, being the first VMO that the PRT is doing on this tour. It's free medical attention, I mean, come on.
Timing, though.
Going now.
Okay, tell them to stop. Okay, first guy come forward.
We needed to provide security, a cordon outside the fob so that the people can come in. People get checked. They're not going to get in if they don't get checked. If they refuse to get checked, then they'll be turned away. But we'd like everyone to get checked, come in, and get seen by the doctors.
What we're seeing already with the girls already congregating, it's truly amazing. Because last time they waited till right at the very end when it looked like we were shutting down, then they brought the women out, and only 4 women at the time. But we've seen other women already sitting up on the other side of the road, so it's pretty good.
It's nothing in depth. It's just some basic medical aid to check out the children to see if there's anything wrong with them, check out the men, women, if they come out to see if there's anything wrong with them, provide them with some basic medication.
The doctors have run out of medication. Okay, apologize. We have no more medication. The doctors can't see anyone else. Next time, we will do our best to treat them all. What I can offer them is the food that we have here. They can take the food, share amongst themselves, older people, little people. Tell him to share. Tell him to share, or I'll take it all away.
It feels great when, you know, you've done something successful for the people that you're helping. Like, it just puts a huge smile on my face knowing that I came here, I did my job, there was success. When you dream big, a lot of things don't follow through, but if you build small, you can see that your successes will come through before the end of the tour. Bob Martello was shut down, and everybody left. I've invested so much time into this place, and now I felt like we had taken a step backwards because we had done so much for the villagers. I felt kind of heartbroken. I don't know what's going to happen to these people. You know, I just feel that I could have done so much more, or just stay here longer to get to know them. You know, when you love your job, you invest time into it, you can't help but get emotional when it comes time to leave.
This country will become stable. I have no doubt in my mind. Is it going to be the 10-year Balkan plan? Is it going to be longer? I don't know. Time in Afghanistan moves at its own pace, as we've discovered, and it's going to take a lot of effort, but it will happen.
I just wish that our tours were a lot longer so that we're able to maintain a certain length of trust with these people, so that when it does come time to hand over, you know, at least we were there for a good period of time. Like, 6 months to me is way too short. You're barely scratching the surface in 6 months.
Should we have stayed longer in Afghanistan?
No. I think our people, our timing was perfect. We did what we had to do. We did what we said we would do, and we left when we said we would under these conditions. And I think we stood by our own word.
I'd like to think the 158 men and women who perished in Afghanistan are looking down and shaking their heads saying, look after my friends. Don't build me memorials. Look after my friends. They need it. Their souls are torn, their flesh is torn.
The training the Canadian Forces offers to its medics is unparalleled, I think, in Western armies or in armies, period, and extraordinarily brave. You know, Canadian got hit, the medic was coming. No matter what, the medic was coming.
It's very hard when you know that you could do everything right and somebody still dies. If I put that tourniquet on a little quicker, if we had put the IV in quicker, or got them breathing faster, would they have lived? And the hard realization is that people just die. And you could do everything right, and you're not going to save a life.
Do you remember everything up to the attack?
It's like a movie trailer. I've got snippets of memory. Man. We're in the village called Shinke by a river for a council meeting with elders. We took our helmets off and lay our weapons down. This insurgent walked up behind me, took an axe from under his robe, and sank it into my head like he was chopping a log.
Sank it into your head.
Trying to get it out for a second bite, which would have killed me, when the man on my left fired his weapon and shot 2 rounds into the kid before he could strike again. The axe hit me on my left back, the back of the skull on the left.
How deep would it have gone into your brain?
3 inches.
Line 11, this is Line 0. Say again the nature of the wound. Line 11, I say again, the nature of the wound is an accident. One to the dead side over.
My brothers thought I was dead, my platoon brothers. The medic started bandaging me up. That's to save my life. And I was medevaced out by a Black Hawk, an American Black Hawk.
They talk about the golden hour. You know, from the time of first injury to the time reaching the OR, they want that an hour, and every minute outside that hour, the chances of survival drop.
My job was to stabilize people, treat the life-threatening injuries, make sure that they wouldn't deteriorate in the 15-minute helicopter ride back to the operating rooms at Kandahar Airfield. Just really the basics. Package them up, make sure they're still breathing and not bleeding, off they go to Kandahar.
The helicopters are such a vital target. They fly really low to the ground, they fly really hard and fast and make a lot of turns in order to avoid, you know, the possibility of being locked on or being shot at. You're trying to treat the patient, the heat inside and the thumping of the blades, and your adrenaline's going, and you've probably sweat out a couple liters of fluid under your body armor, and at the same time, you're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet?
My name is Master Corporal Paul Franklin, and I was injured in 2006 in a suicide bombing. There's 2 weeks left of our tour. As we drive in through the city gates, all of a sudden, Jeff, my co-driver, calls car right, and at that exact moment, I swerve as hard as I can left. He detonates on the axle, and it lifts our vehicle up through the air, tumbling. I pop out, my left leg's ripped off instantly, my right leg's destroyed, hands and face are on fire.
We got back in from our patrol, and we heard a very large explosion, and the building moved to the left. So we knew immediately it was big, it was bad, and it was one of our patrols.
I remember flying through the air and then just smack, sitting up the side, sitting against the wall like that. And then I was like, uh-oh. And then I knew, as soon as I looked down, I knew I was in trouble. As a medic, I'm like, man, I'm in deep, 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 deep trouble here. I saw my leg 5 feet away, and I reached for my tourniquet, but it's in my leg that's just 5 feet away, so I can't get at it. As soon as I was injured, I knew I had to come home, and I wanted to make it home for my wife and my son, and I knew that I had to make it. I was even thinking, you know, worst case scenario, I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Rick Hansen went around the world, so I mean, if he can do that, then I can go shopping in a wheelchair. It's not a big deal.
Did you really think of Rick Hansen in that moment?
I did, yeah.
Paul came in first. He was bleeding significantly and missing a leg. Immediately, he was cared for by the doctor and the physician assistant. And then someone handed me a bag, a black garbage bag. And that was his leg.
Here you're treating somebody who you knew quite well. Is that different? Did that alter things?
Yes, because you think about their family, I think. So whenever I would like to think whenever a medical professional is treating someone, it's always their best. But when it's someone you know, someone you've worked with, you think about their family too. You think, I have to be able to send him home. My husband, Bryce Keller, was with one PPCLI, and Bryce was slated to be on the 7-month deployment that followed mine. I came back the second week of February in 2006, and he flew out 8 days later.
Were those 8 days good?
Oh, yeah. But I came back from being there thinking, Why did I ever say that you could go there? You listen to the radio constantly. You check the headlines constantly. You get home and the news goes on the TV and stays on the TV. Military families listen to the news a lot.
I'm in Landstuhl, Germany, in ICU. My wife's there, and it is now 3 days later, and the doc comes up to her and says, "We have the leg." And she's like, "What do you want me to do with it?" And they say some people do a service, some people just throw it in an incinerator. She's just like, just get rid of it. But the funny part is the leg they sent to Landstuhl initially, the reason why it was so late, wasn't my leg. My real leg then came from Kandahar to Dubai and then to Landstuhl. So, you imagine these poor pilots flying around with these legs. That's Franklin's leg. I thought I just flew Franklin's leg. When they were finally doing my final surgery on my right leg, the doctor says, if we cup above the knee, chances of you walking is pretty much slim to none. And he says, what we want to do is not finish that surgery. We're going to wait, and then we'll talk to you about your future, your plans, and all the rest. I said, no. If you see something in there like infection, get rid of it, cut it off. Then they said, well, you realize what the outcome will be. And I said, yes, it's the same outcome, which I knew from the beginning. I'm going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life.
I'd known Debbie. We met in '01, just before the bombings, World Trade Center. She was with me in Germany because they flew her and my parents over to say goodbye. That's how bad it was. I was in an induced coma for a while, for a couple of weeks, I think. My first memory was bagpipes. I was going to be transferred to Edmonton for rehab, and my regiment came in, gave me an honor guard. My platoon, the platoon I commanded before I went overseas.
My greatest moment was when my son walked in the room and he saw me, and I was battered and beaten, and I was not looking good. And my son said to me, can you still play video games? And I said, yeah. And he goes, okay, don't worry about it then. And that for me was like, I just laughed at that, and it was great for me. And I knew I couldn't play soccer or skateboard or ride a bike or whatever, but for whatever reason, he chose to ask that silly question, which just made me smile, and I smile ever since because of that.
What was your prognosis?
Probably death, but if I survived, they said I'd be a vegetable for the rest of my life.
Did you know that?
No.
Did Debbie know that?
Yeah. But Debbie didn't give up on me. Most women would run away. In fact, some of them did, I understand.
I left for work, and I heard while I was driving, they released the name of one of my friends who had died earlier in the day.
Who's that?
Corporal Chris Reed. And I knew it was bad at that moment because that was my husband's driver. So if Chris was dead, what about the people that were with him? They said 4 were injured and 4 were dead.
On the radio?
On the radio. I called my friend Amy, who had deployed with me, and she said, just get to work, just get to work. So I was actually notified of Bryce's death at work.
I can't imagine how bad that was.
I hope that you never have to know. And how that piece goes from when you're treating someone that you know. I don't want their family to have to know that either.
I was the National Repatriation Officer for the Canadian Forces from 2008 onward, pretty much towards the end of the mission.
And what would be a one-sentence description of that job?
From the moment of death to internment, and then sometimes after, to ensure everything goes right. I was very proud of what the Canadian Forces did. You know, we heard a lot of things in the news, the Americans, the British, you know, how they bring them in at night. So yeah, I was pretty proud of being part of that process.
We had 2 Canadian medics killed on my rotation, Corporal Mike Starker and Corporal Wilmot. And I escorted Mike's casket all the way back to Calgary. You know, all the fears and, you know, the emotion of, you know, what am I going to say to his wife? What am I going to say when I get home? What am I going to see? Then you've lost your friend and you're trying to grieve through that. You know, I had to go down the Highway of Heroes in the front of the hearse, seeing the 50 bridges with the flags. I think I broke down right then in the car and, you know, cried for the next little bit. Every bridge, I think there's 50 of them between Trenton and Toronto, and every highway, and ambulances and fire trucks, and there's nothing on the 401. The police have it all blocked off.
I would say to those Canadians that came out to the bridges and lined the 401, you'll never know the solace that you brought loved ones to know that the nation, you know, for a parent or for a wife or children, to know people share your grief.
Generally, the protocol is for families to stay with their loved one until Toronto, and then the next day to fly home and to wait at home for the remains to be released, and then to carry on with whatever burial they've decided on. I refused to leave, so I could bring him home myself.
I remember that as we're coming into Calgary, the pilot announced that you may see 2 military people on the flight. And he explained what we were there for, that they had the honor of carrying a fallen Canadian soldier home. And you get to see that plane just went quiet. I think the first time I've been on an airplane where the whole plane was just dead quiet on landing. People didn't know what to do. There's people crying on the plane, and you know, they were clapping when we got up, and again, it was just another whole flood of, you know, you could see the sorrow, you know, it's like every Canadian felt the loss of this Canadian soldier. This pride that people showed that you're not used to.
November the 11th, the day for the fallen. But the rest of the year, think about the wounded that were there when, you know, who are facing huge challenges in this country right now, huge challenges.
Injured Canadian soldiers are well treated within the Department of National Defense. As that wounded soldiers for 3 years that they cover you, absolutely brilliant, world's best. As soon as they leave the Department of National Defense, suddenly they fall under the purview of Veterans Affairs, and everything falls apart.
The soldiers of World War II, Korea, were treated with security and dignity because of their monthly pension. Unfortunately, post-June 2006, we have 2 standards of veterans, the haves and the have-nots. We already have homeless veterans.
Veterans Affairs asked me to prove that I have no legs so that I can get nursing benefits and shopping benefits and house cleaning, so which is the thing that I use. So within that, I have to prove that I have difficulty doing housekeeping. Now, I have to prove that every single year. I have to prove I have no legs every year. And sure enough, they stepped up into the silly world and said, okay, he doesn't have to prove it every year. He only has to prove it every 3 years. It should simply say, are you permanently disabled, yes or no?
I had bad PTSD episodes in Edmonton.
Memories, flashbacks, what?
Yeah, everything. I couldn't read about anything about Afghanistan or watch on the TV. And I was terrified of uniforms. Of course, my friends all visited me in uniform to make me feel good. But I was just howling at Debbie. I remember screaming at her, foul things at her. She would hide our daughter, Grace, away in the basement. I remember thinking, this is what it's like to be insane. I could feel it coming on. I was powerless to resist it. At Halloween, I had a bit of a bad go because the fireworks sounded like RPGs, and they triggered my PTSD. But I came home and put Noah to bed, my son Noah, to bed, and that calmed me down.
I got out of the hospital the day after spring break ended. And so Simon was walking to school. And I said, I'm gonna walk you to school and maybe do show and tell. And I ended up walking to school. It was very difficult. It was only a half a kilometer walk, but man, oh man, it was a really difficult thing to do. And my son's looking down and he's looking for the cracks and he wants to make sure I don't trip.
I married Debbie in 2010. Yeah. I was not going to be married slumped in a wheelchair. So I practiced standing up for long enough to save my vows. It was like, you know, couples practice for the first dance? Yeah, we practiced for my first stand, and that was our dance. Yeah.
You know, people say, was the Afghan mission worth it? And I would suggest, this is my own thought, I would suggest the only ones that can truly answer that are the loved ones of the fallen.
I have regrets of a personal nature. But that's what my husband and I wanted to do. We wanted to be soldiers, and soldiers deploy. I don't see our time there as wasted.
We brought them back with poise, dignity, involved the families, and in the end, the nation involved itself. Nobody organized this. And I think maybe the Highway Heroes will stand as a lesson for Canadians, and particularly for Canadian politicians as they cheer that there is no good outcome to war.